Oh, not to mention that Def Leppard snare drum that basically killed so many records for that. I mean, it worked for Def Leppard. It worked for no other record.
An all-new episode of The Jeremy White Show.
Available wherever you stream.
Our next guest is one of my favorite singers of all time. His latest record, Songs of White Lion, Volume 2, is available now wherever you get your music. Also, currently on tour, performing at the Whiskey A Go-Go later on around Halloween time. Just so much fun. MikeTrampOfficial.com to get your tour dates. And, of course, pick up the music wherever your music is sold. Welcome to the show for the first time, the one, the only, Mike Tramp. How's it going?
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. Talk about where you are right now. You're in obviously a beautiful hotel room in the Four Seasons somewhere. Obviously after someone a raging party last night after the show, right?
Let's just stick to a Hampton Inn.
Touring's definitely a little bit different from what it was back in the day, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, you're much more alert. You're much more alert. Now, I have to say that in the many, many years that I've been touring, I've always been alert. I've always had my feet on the ground. I've always gone to the laundromat. I've always gone to Walmart. So to me, it's just really a continuation of life. I understand that I don't sit and watch MTV, all that other stuff, and I maybe don't, go to perform in a big arena, but life hasn't necessarily changed that much. There's not as many girls in the hotel lobby, but basically it's all the same. I fit the same pant size.
Now, you know what? Hey, that's one thing you have on a lot of other rock stars because they're not wearing the same size pants. I'm not throwing any names out there, but a couple of guys could use the Ozempic. Let's just say that.
Well, it's up to yourself. You only you are to blame.
It's funny you say that because really being on the road, it really is a lifestyle, right? I mean, you can either let yourself go or you can stay healthy and find a way to eat good and get the good food and, get some cardio and work out. I mean, is the lifestyle a big thing for you on the road? You try to stay healthy?
No, I mean, we started out with a little bit of goofing around, but the point is right.
Yeah.
We sit in the car and talk about that. I mean, right now we're just the four guys in the band traveling around like that. We're grown up. We're all parents. We all have responsibilities, regardless of if we want to admit it and things like that. So you can't completely let go of yourself. I'm always amazed when we go back on, on reading biographies and documentaries of the real rock and roll heroes, if you're talking about Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, the Sex Pistols, not that they were my heroes, but there is a limit of how much bad oil you can pour in an engine before it stops. It's as simple as that. And, there's also a limit of how many times you can stop at McDonald's. It is just a fact. You decide. Nothing does that. So it does require some sort of planning, just like it does. I change my guitar strings every second show. There are just certain things. I'm a singer. Singing never came easy to me. I can hold a tune. I don't have any form of singing lessons and stuff like that. And I just became Mike Tramp. I can't sit up and talk all night. I can't just, so you decide, like you said before, how you want to walk on stage the next night. And there are, without a doubt, some sad examples that are walking out on stage, and I wonder how that feels, because I live by an old movie that came out in the 70s called They Shoot Horses, Don't They?
I never saw it. I'm 30.
Oh, but basically, it's a dancing movie, but they refer to them when a horse goes down in a horse race like that stuff, it's not going to be returned. It'll end up as burgers.
Right. Well, that's it. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, look at all these years. A lot of these guys have lost their voice. I mean, as you get older, obviously the timbre of your voice, your range doesn't necessarily stay where it was. I mean, how are you coping with that these days? I mean, going from singing all the way up here. Now I've been watching some live videos from this tour. Man, you're sounding great. The songs sound fantastic live.
I appreciate you put it that way, because the way of saying somebody losing the voice. I mean, that's a terminology we use on the road. Somebody can get a bad cold or an infection and things like that. I've lost your voice, and it's just like you've lost your dog or you've lost your kid in the mall, but within a couple of hours they come back.
Yeah.
Now, a voice changing, just like the elbow of a quarterback, is something completely different. Now we're dealing with biology. We're dealing with muscles. We're dealing with something that only nature is in charge of. And there are a lot of singers out there that maybe will not accept it. Now, what I have done, or what I basically had to follow, in the early White Line years, I sang higher than I basically were able to, that I basically were trained to do, or even had the knowledge to do. I was just able to do it at that moment and in the studio for a few years on the road, even though I was miserable in my hotel room. It was tough to wake up the next day and thinking, will it last? When we got to the Main Attraction album, which is the fourth White Line album, I could already feel not just what did my hair color changed with a little bit of help from the hairdresser. My voice would changing, becoming a little fatter, a little deeper. And Vito and I were writing the songs to fit that, or I just wasn't singing something that I couldn't do. When White Line broke up, I had a band called Freak of Nature for 3 albums. It's probably the most powerful singing that I've ever done, and it required a lot, but it felt very natural for me to sing like that. When Freak of Nature broke up, or when I ended it after the 3 albums, and I started writing solo, I wrote the kind of songs that I write when I sit with my acoustic guitar and stuff like that. So I followed what was natural. And before I knew it, I was into 4 solo albums. And that is now where Mike Tramp was. A few times that I then sort of like almost against my will were called in to sing White Line again. I could see that I wasn't able to go back and revisit White Line 1987. So the first thing we do is we tune all the songs down a full step from E to D. But even there, I felt uncomfortable with it, and I would stop it, and I would go back and do a couple more solo albums and so on. So when it came to do the songs of White Lion, I worked a long time with Marcus Nan, the new guitar player, in finding out what feels right. I mean, at the same time as I'm singing lower, my voice is also much stronger as a full range singer.
Yeah.
So I wanted to feel, and I'm going to compare myself to 2 of my favorite singers here, not compare, but saying, you got David Coverdale, probably one of the greatest rock voices of all times.
Yep.
Whitesnake, the English version. And a lot of Americans will not know, but that's David Coverdale before his hair got blonde. That's, and you got Phil Lynott, Thin Lizzy. Those are the dark rock voices.
Yeah.
Those are the voices I lean myself up against, even though I can't sing like them, but I like that tone of voice. I like that. And now when I go out and sing to the audience, I feel that the audience at that age does not want that thin, high voice and then look at a man standing up there singing. Right. So I feel that I've sort of created my own Frankenstein of that. And I'm, first of all, I'm not embarrassed. Oh, I feel very cool. And it enables me that when I talk to the audience and when I start singing and when they see me, I'm 63 years old on stage, I feel that it's one person.
Mm-hmm. But take me back. I mean, when you and Vito were writing those songs on those early White Line records, I mean, like you said, you were kind of singing without necessarily knowing how to sing, and it was just coming out of you. I mean, what were you guys chasing at the time? Was it trying to chase that Def Leppard hysteria type of sound? Was it the A&R guy on your over your shoulder saying you need to sound like this? This is what the top 40, it's what the charts are. I mean, what was the songwriting process like, and what was the mentality there?
Well, I mean, Jeremy, that's a great question. What were we chasing? Because when Vito and I sat down the first time, it was only really just like about a month and a half after we'd met each other.
Hmm.
We sat down the first time with two guitars and we wrote Broken Heart. Broken Heart in the original key of D minor is the highest song that I would sing in my career. That's the first song we write.
That's insane to even just think about that.
I honestly don't think there were a plan or pattern. I think from Vito's side, growing up with all the American bands, me growing up with all the European bands, with my heroes being anything from Freddie Mercury to Bowie to Bad Company to Sweet and Slade and that. And then, of course, later, right before I came to America, falling in love with Steve Perry, with Robin Sander, Cheap Trick, with Steve Walsh, Kansas, with Eddie Money, with Dennis DeYoung, Styx. You're talking about great vocalists of the highest caliber, the American sound of hard rock. So that knowledge is in the back of you when you start writing. At the same time, also, my songwriting came from a completely different. I'd grown up with folk music. My mom was playing Dylan, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Roy Orbison, Elvis.
Like real singer-songwriter stuff.
That's my guitar playing. My guitar playing has never evolved. But what it does do is it does why you got that very extreme and detailed. And even at the time when Vito was sitting across with me with the Stratocaster and reaching like almost 8 frets with his fingers. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there with the Dylan guitar playing E minor in the 2nd fret with 2 fingers. There is something that meets in the middle. Mm-hmm. Even though it wasn't planned, I will deliver the melody. And Vito will listen to me. And he would always understand that the melody would have to be the core of the song because we were in the back of our head much more thinking Lennon-McCartney than we were thinking,
Tyler Perry.
Exactly.
And it makes sense. I mean, like, especially at the time, it's like, it was a very competitive environment. I mean, you were battling it out to try and get the airplay on MTV and on Z100 or KLOS. And it's like, I guess at the end of the day, the best of the best kind of rose to the top, right? And I mean, at one point, you guys really were performing at that level.
Yeah, and you say that, but you got to realize from when we write Broken Heart in March of 1983, there's 4 years until Wade hits the airways.
Before it gets there. Was that annoying for you? I mean, that just like, would that sit on your shoulder? Just like, why haven't we, like, why has it taken 4 years for like us to get to Wade, for example?
Like, you know what? In 1978, somebody brought High Voltage AC/DC to the house I was living in. 10 years later, 10 years later, I supported them for 3 months. Sometimes things take time.
Yeah, no, that's true. Like fine wine, right?
Yeah, it's as simple as that. You know, I don't know. There maybe were Thursdays that we might be bitter about that things were taking the time, but I think that maybe sometimes people understand or do not understand. We were also in the middle of a decade called the 80s that was just a great time to be alive in rock and roll.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, like the new documentary just came out on Paramount Plus, Nothing But a Good Time. Of course, you're featured in the series as well. Talk a little bit about the 80s. I mean, like, was it really as debaucherous as everybody paints it out to be? I mean, like the coke and the women and just the absolute madness. Like, was it business? Was it pleasure? I mean, talk a little bit about that and paint a picture for us.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're obviously just talking right now about the interviews with the artists that were on the other side of the barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, and I did some great. I feel I did some great interviews, and I feel actually I might even be adding something different. Let's see how much they cut me in or out. That I'm actually adding maybe the total opposite what all the LA bands will be talking about.
Yeah.
Because regardless of how many girls I've had in my dressing room or in my hotel room, White Line was always much more for the music. We were a Brooklyn basement, band, and not a Sunset Strip band hanging out, forgetting that we also had to rehearse. And I'm saying that with all respect for everyone.
Of course.
But I would look much more at it as that when I came to America in early 82 with my band from Denmark, and the 80s had just started, and before we even started playing the clubs, just the feeling of being in the clubs and the environment of the crowd, of hanging out, enjoying a beer, hearing the DJ cranking out all that great rock and roll that was coming out of the early 80s. We're talking 82. Pyromania had just arrived. I mean, that to me probably explains it a little bit better than it did when we got to 86 or something like that. And now I'm in White Line and we're much more involved with what goes on behind the scene. But seeing the fans exist as a whole movement on the streets, in the clubs. Didn't matter if you walked into, Burger King or you're on the subway train. I was living in Queens, going into Manhattan to hang out at the guitar shops, and how everybody, that to me is much more key than the stories the band tells, because most of the bands in those interviews will be talking about themselves and things like that. I'm really talking about, let's not forget about the movement that made it possible for us to shine.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I talked to so many artists about that and just like how rabid the fans were back in the 80s, and just how, I mean, you look at fans today and the equivalent would be, the Little Monsters for Lady Gaga, or like Olivia Rodrigo's fans, or Taylor Swift's, like, it's almost like a cult type religion sort of thing. And that seems to be what it was like back in the day. I mean, like, you were either a Van Hagar fan or a David Lee Roth fan. And you know what I mean? It's like, it seems you had your camps sort of thing, and you had your people.
Yeah, but the only difference is that the Taylor Swift fans don't have a place to go on Friday night to hang out with your fellow Swifters. We had the gathering of our rock fans, and I remember when I went out on the States the first time with my Danish band, which was called Lion, when we arrived in New York in 82. Man, after the show, I went to the band. Jesus, I got to get myself some better clothes. The audience are better looking than me. I mean, it was just a feeling, man. It's like, imagine, you should have seen the men's bathroom. My manager owned this big rock club, which was key to 80s rock in Brooklyn, called L'Amour. It held almost 2,000 people. The bathroom was like it had 10 different kinds of hairsprays, cologne. There was a guy managing the bathroom. And when the guys got out there to take a leak, man, they were like throwing $1 and, spraying their hair before they bent back out. And the same thing in the girls' bathroom. I mean, it was insane. But I guess in reality, even though I have only seen it in Happy Days and Grease and stuff like that, maybe it was like that too in the 50s with people with Brill Cream and
the greasers.
you know what? This is what I love being not an American about those decades that were so expressful and distinctive in styles when people found their self and what a decade could do. You got the 60s, the hippie love, but and then add the cars and the clothes. Oh, I would do anything to be part of that kind of thing before. Nobody was talking politics.
Right. Yeah. It always comes down to that, right? We're talking to Mike Tramp, brand new record out, available wherever you get your music. Jesus, White Lion Volume 2, available now. And of course, the big tour dates running pretty much all the way through the rest of the year. Talking about the Paramount Plus series, Nothing But a Good Time. A good friend, my co-host Mitch LaFawn, wrote in and wanted me to ask you a very, very specific question. He said that in the new Paramount Plus documentary, you mentioned that in around 91, no agent, label, manager would even return any of your calls. Talk a little bit about the early 90s and being basically alone. And, why did you have to reinvent yourself with Freak of Nature? Why not just go back to Denmark and go work at Tivoli?
Well, I just posted today that the deal I made with a man at the crossroad was a commitment for life. There's no retreat, no surrender. Failure is not an option. Forward is the only gear I have. What I can refer, I can explain that in or comment that in two ways. I mean, what I'm speaking about that time is the ending of White Lion and basically sort of coming to the reality as the front man, the singer, the songwriter, the man who started the band decides that he wants to end the band, that whole team around you shows no sign of wanting to say, no, you can't do this. We're a business. I'm actually in reality, and actually, I know I'm not the kind of guy that sometimes asks different things, but for those kind of people that saw some kind of monstrous, especially when the Metallica movie, when originally it came out, and I even found myself laughing in certain scenes at the same time, especially when Lars, who's a good friend of mine, and James sits there with the therapist, and they try to do this. What you realize right there, it's not just between two people sitting there and finding a way. You're talking about a multi-million dollar business. That's what they're talking about. They're not just talking about two people. They're talking about saving a multi-million dollar business. White Lion still had 5 albums on Elektra Records, or Atlantic Records, sorry. Even though Kurt Cobain and grunge had started, rearing their ugly head into the 90s, we still had many ways we could have found if we wanted to be a band. The point of this is that if nobody's not willing to fight for it, then why the hell am I going to fight for it? So exactly. And there were, and one thing that I didn't add to that, which my good friend Mitch asked question about, is I did an audition, or not audition. I did a showcase with Freak of Nature already in '92, with a good amount of record company came down to check out the band, and I think they just all sat there and says, "Well, that singer, he was part of the '80s. We're not interested in that."
Mm-hmm. Wow. So there was already a stigma at that point where you were just untouchable
it's definitely no. Yeah. It's just the way it was.
Guilty by association. We want nothing to do with it.
He was part of Holocaust,
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's interesting. So it's amazing how once the 90s did hit and Kurt Cobain and all those guys came in and the rock stars didn't. I remember, who was I watching? It was like some rapper. It might have been like Tupac or Biggie or something like that. And they were saying, well, you know what? The reason why the hip hop artists are so big these days is because, well, the rock stars in the early 90s said, we don't want to be rock stars anymore. And they started walking up on stage in their t-shirts and their jeans. And well, then the hip hop guys said, well, you don't want to be the rock stars? Well, all right, well, we'll be the rock stars. And rock never recovered from that.
Yeah. I think, of course, I haven't seen I haven't seen anything except for just a trailer from Nothing But a Good Time. And Nothing But a Good Time is has walls. It will only reach so far out. And most of my 80s competitors and comrades and brothers, I always feel is very limited to how far they want to go in explaining things. Because another thing that's also sometimes wasn't mentioned, nothing but a good time, which in many ways was sort of started by David Lee Roth, was nobody was interested in a big explanation. They were just really saying, are you coming to my party? And so on. You get my point. I once tried to explain the meaning behind my songs and nobody was interested in really hearing it. That's a different story now, as I'm 63 years old and standing talking to a grown audience. And I'm very happy that I was not the one putting the X in sex. My lyrics is actually something that I can talk about for hours. But another point is that the 80s, and we shouldn't cry about it, the 80s was slain and put to sleep by the record company and the industry, because once they succeeded with White Lion, they signed Skid Row. And once they signed Skid Row, they signed the new Skid Row. And once they were, it was just the assembly line. It's the iPhone version 25, which is already on the drawing board. It's just really a matter of how long should we wait before we give the audience that option. So MTV goaded every 80s band to overdo themselves. They basically goaded every 80s band to kill themselves, because in the end, and I'm not going to say myself, but in the end, the last wave of the 80s bands were a completely joke. They had copied us 5 million times, and I can't stand listening or looking at it, because there's no originality. There were only so many waves, and after that, everything was a copy. That's, of course, I can sit and say that, but when I look at that, that's the way I see it. It was cloned, and people. It's funny that you have the word grunge, but then you also have the word alternative. Now, if you look at the word alternative, an alternative is to, I don't want that black car. Do you have an alternative to that? Yeah, well, we got the gray.
Right.
The 80s
it's
were
still the same car.
At the end, there was nobody that came with anything new once we got to last 2.5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I spoke to Phil Collin from Def Leppard about that, and he said, Mercury had their Def Leppard, and the next thing you know, every other label had to have their Def Leppard, and then they wanted the copy, and then he said with White Line, they get their White Line, and then they have to find the next White Line, and it seems to be like a vicious cycle where they just want to try and cash in, but there's no originality behind it.
Oh, not to mention that Def Leppard snare drum that basically killed so many records for that. It worked for Def Leppard. It worked for no other record.
You're not a fan of the cannonball snare? I mean, Mutt Lange really, he talk about that. I mean, you're not a fan?
Like I said, it worked for one band and one band only, because of Def Leppard sound after High and Dry, that, and of course the terrible accident for Rick Allen, that band owns that sound, and that sound works only for Def Leppard. That's when the second you made the snare drum a separate part from the drum kit, it destroyed it, man. For those rock fans that don't want to hear about the hair, but actually want to hear about the sound, go back and listen to early Van Halen. Go even back and listen to Deep Purple, UFO, Thin Lizzy. Hear how a drum kit sounds when it's a drum kit. We all felt for that. We all felt for that, and it didn't work.
But it was also a product of the times. I mean, you look at the technology that was coming in. I mean, look, even Alex Van Halen on the 1984 record, when he started using the Simmons drums and the SD, the SES, and he went and got more into the technology. I mean, things got more digital. You had the Fairlights, you had the Synclaviers, all the samplers were coming in. It seemed to me, even on the pop side, all those pop records, they wanted the sound as fake as possible. So it made sense that it translated onto the rock side.
Yeah, there's many times when I wake up and I have to try to find an answer for the reason of living in the day. I mean, it basically is, when man thought Earth was flat, there were somebody who says, well, I have to see what happens when I go to the edge. So man pushes everything to the edge to find out what is beyond that.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I interviewed Tom Werman, and he was talking about working on all those Motley Crue records. And I asked him, it was like, the big snare drum sound and all these things. I'm like, when did that happen? And he's like, well, just kind of went with what everybody else was doing. I'm like, well, so had Mutt Lange not done that cannonball snare on Pyromania, maybe we wouldn't have gotten that everywhere else. I mean, even with the stuff that Bruce Fairbairn and Bob Rock were doing on those Bon Jovi records, I mean, you kind of had a sound. And if you didn't have that sound, I mean, it is a product of the time. But to me, I can't hear those songs without that big production. If I don't have stadium reverb on all those drums, I mean, you even listen to Love in an Elevator, like Pump, Aerosmith, and those records. They don't have the character. Rock records today don't have that. They all sound like dry, dead drums recorded in a garage somewhere, or everybody's using the same Steven Slate drum samples. I mean, at least the records had character back then.
Well, Jeremy, obviously I can hear that you're very aware of that whole sound spectrum of that you just mentioned there. So obviously, Nothing But a Good Time, and then the next miniseries called Nothing But a Snare Drum. We'll have to do that.
This season on an all-new episode of Nothing But a Snare Drum.
Mistakes, I mean, it's a fair thing. Learning mistakes we did in the studio and while they happen and so on. So if you feel you want to go back there, mistakes your parents did raising you, you know what? All that matters is let's not repeat it tomorrow.
Well, look, I mean, do you think that it was a mistake to mix those White Lion records the way they were made?
No. We were, even though we didn't do drugs, we were sitting on the ceiling. We were ecstatic when we were doing listen, everything in rock and roll is the chase is better than the catch.
I completely agree. And that's like the sentiment from everybody. So
it's just sad.
Talk a little about, just real quick before we wrap up. I mean, Songs of White Lion Volume 2 available now. And of course, tour dates, MikeTrampOfficial.com. Go and check them out. Talk a little bit about just guitar wise, for example. I saw a video of you were playing this amazing, really, really nice telly. How long with a red pickguard on it? Talk a little bit about that telly. What year is it? How long have you had it?
Oh, the tortoise.
Yeah.
Dude, everything is so fake these days, bro, man. It's very rarely that I do an interview and we actually talk music. So I appreciate it.
Welcome to the Jeremy White Show. We love music.
Yeah, Jeremy. No, I'm told to appreciate it, and so to prevent all people, starting posting thumbs down. Let me put it in this way, because I feel much better when I say it in this way. And I said it early on, I'm a campfire guitar player. I'm a campfire songwriter. I write songs so everybody along the campfire can sing along with them. Nobody wants guitar intros. Nobody wants drum solos. People just want to sing along.
Damn right.
By
the way, let me just stop you there. When are we just going to finally get rid of drum solos? It's 2024. Enough now.
Well, listen, the drum solos have always just been for the singer to go back and get something for his throat to drink and get some oxygen. Nobody wants to hear drum solos unless it was Neil Peart or Buddy Rich. Drum solo. I mean, while we're completely getting off the track of anything, do you know Alex Van Halen used to do drum solos as a second song in Van Halen because he was too drunk at the end?
Yeah, I've seen that story so many times. Unless you're Doc McGee, like, okay, drum solo. Now we got more time to go sell more merch.
So anyway, just back to your guitar. I mean, I do appreciate that you say that. I mean, and it's and good thing Marcus is not in the room, sort of laughing over my shoulder. Both Marcus is the guitar player, and Marcus is the guitar player that has made Songs of White Lion possible. Mm-hmm. Without him, it would be impossible. We actually started out doing the first festival show last year in Europe with me just being the front man. But me, for the last 20 years, have had the telecast around my neck on all my solo shows. Mm-hmm. And I felt completely like a fish out of the water. I almost didn't even know how to move like I did in the last days of White Lion. And the following show, I brought the Telecaster back and sort of just mixed it in. I can't play any of the stuff that's in White Lion. It's not my kind of style and stuff like that. Without any disrespect to my heroes like Springsteen and Petty and, Mellencamp and all the strumming. But by me bringing the telly back, and a lot of times I don't play in the verses, I don't play in that, I leave space. I do bring a little bit of a chiming sound into the overall picture, where you got the big chunky guitar riff, but you have some open chords ringing out, and it does add a little bit of spice. It'll never be on the albums, but live it does.
Well, it fills out the sound, right?
It does. Marcus introduced me to a very smaller guitar company called Exotic Guitars that builds his guitars. And even I have a large selection of Telecasters, but I got one of their exotic Telecasters, and it takes a long time to build, and they actually had one. And it's just phenomenal, and it feels like I've owned it all my life.
Yeah, it looks like one of those vintage tellies that have.
But listen. Just like faded jeans, it's all fucking just done in a workshop. It's all Reddick. I could never play enough bar shows to wear it down. It is, but it feels great in my hands, and so it gives me that comfort that it's always been with me.
Yeah, absolutely. One last thing before we wrap up, just to go back to the 80s and talking about how competitive the scene was when it came to guitar players. I mean, Vito Bratta, one of the best. Let's be real here. I just had Steve Stevens on the show. We were talking about how you had to kind of find a way to sound unique in the 80s because everybody was just so good. Talk a little about how important your relationship was with him at the time. And, you guys have had a lot of history together, obviously, but having him in the band and having that gunslinging guitar player, that was your Eddie Van Halen, right?
There's no doubt. Let's put it this way. Vito played guitar before he discovered Van Halen. Mm-hmm. But Vito told me the story that he went to see, I think it was Sammy Hagar running like Montrose and Journeys, something like short like that, and Van Halen wasn't listed. And suddenly he hears this guitar playing, and the curtain they're playing a theater, and underneath this curtain slides this guitar player, and it's Van Halen, and they only played half an hour. And when they were done, he went home and says, "I've seen rock and roll. There's nothing more to see." And so, of course, he was inspired by Eddie and stuff like that. And there are some hammer-ons and a little bit of Floyd work in Vito's guitar playing, but that's where it stops. There's no guitar solos that has anything to do with Eddie. Eddie was brought up around Clapton and Hendrix and a lot of blues. Vito wasn't. So Vito is unique in his own way. And I can tell you, when the few times when I thought about bringing a new White Lion version together, stuff like that, I reached out to some of those guitar players you just mentioned. Nobody wanted to touch Vito Bratta because Vito's guitar solos, you have to play note for note. You cannot start them and not finish them. Vito never had to think about me, and I never had to think about Vito when it came to what we brought together at the table in songwriting. We never had a single disagreement when it came to where we were musically. Now, everything else, we were night and day, heaven and hell, and had nothing in common. Zero in common. We have nothing in common in life but our songwriting. We managed to do those 4 albums, and when that was over, the nothing in common was what made the band break apart in 1 second and no will to fight for it.
Right. Yeah, and it's a shame. At the end of the day, the hang is 99% of the battle is what every band kind of says, and it's like if you can't get along with your wife on the road.
Exactly. And I have not done anything since. I've written every single song by myself since that day, but I do not go on the road. I don't work with anybody that I don't go out, eat and drink with after. I don't go work with anybody that I can't give a brotherly love. It's as simple. I don't want happy ending massages. I want somebody that stays the night.
No, exactly.
Why did I put that in?
You know what? Hey, this hour is brought to you by the happy ending. Go to Mike Tramp's room later on. He'll give you love and affection is what you need. And look, Marcus is absolutely killing it. I mean, like, man, I've seen some footage from the live show and it's like, fucking hell, like just absolutely slaying it. The guitar tone even, like, fantastic.
Well, the thing with Marcus is that Marcus is going out playing what he needs to play. He has let, when it comes to do the White Lion thing here, he's locked his ego in his gun safe.
Mm-hmm.
I have never ever seen that guy bring himself out in the live show or in the recordings. He's 100% dedicated to the task of the songs and the playing. I don't think nobody else would do that.
Yeah. And you're also kind of paying respect to the music and also what the fans come to expect from the show. They want to hear it like the record is played, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're right on it. 100%.
Well, I'm highly recommending everybody go and check you out this year because, man, you still got some tour dates all the way through pretty much almost to the holidays, playing some great venues. Wow. Out with the Voids, by the way, great visualizer on the Frontiers Music YouTube channel. And wow, Songs of White Lion, Volume 2, available now wherever you get your music. Mike Tramp, this is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for taking time to chat. We'll do this again. We'll have to keep in touch.
Jeremy, it has been a phenomenal interview, man. I enjoyed it so much. I could do part 2 down the road.
All right. When we come back, we got another hour with Mike Tramp, everybody.
From the Waldorf Astoria.
Yes, that's it.
Breakfast in bed.
An all-new episode of The Jeremy White Show.
Available wherever you stream.